Welcome back to Vespasian, Ray. Episode 10.
Yeah, it is. How are you doing?
Doing good.
Good.
At the end of our last episode, episode 9, the Jews inside of Jerusalem decided that they needed to stop their infighting and unite against the Romans. Titus had just survived through the will of God, according to Josephus, an attack when he was doing some recon.
Right.
Now he has another narrow escape. Tell us the story of what happens next, Ray.
Well, first of all, and I don't know how to say this in Latin, but he said, Jews to the left of me, Jews to the right of me. You know, what do you do? But he's 30. I think he just turned 30 years old the previous December. You could argue at the height of his strength or whatever, but he knows that he needs to live because if his dad is going to be emperor or his dad is emperor, one day he's going to be emperor. I'm not going to fucking die here when I have a chance to be emperor. So what does he do? Balls to the wall. And you have to admire this. He whips out his sword. He yells to the men closest to him, follow me. And he charges right at his attackers. You don't prevaricate. You don't try to dodge them or you go right at them. He smashes them in the face. He uses his horse as a weapon. He just charges right into them. And he is able to cut a path enough through the enemy crowd to get the hell out of there. Yes, some of his men don't make it because they're firing the missiles. They got either the slings or whatever other various weapons. I apologize, I don't know. But yes, some of his men do go down, but he gets out of there by being bold. Fortune favors the bold, and that's exactly what he did. But hopefully he learned something because he got kind of close to the northwest corner. Dude, don't do that. I mean, I know he was eager. I know he wanted to check out the lay of the land, but you've got to be militarily prudent or you could be extremely dead.
Well, you say fortune favors the bold, but Josephus says it was God that favored Titus here. He was protected by God because he came out of it without a scratch.
That's
Josephus writes the following, and hence we may principally learn that both the success of wars and the dangers the kings are in are under the providence of God. For while such a number of darts were thrown at Titus, when he had neither his headpiece on nor his breastplate, for, as I told you, he went out not to fight, but to view the city, none of them touched his body, but went aside without hurting him, as if all of them missed him on purpose, and only made a noise as they passed by him. So he diverted those perpetually with his sword that came on his side, and overturned many of those that directly met him, and made his horse ride over those that were overthrown. The enemy indeed made a shout at the boldness of Caesar, and exhorted another to rush upon him. Yet did those against whom he marched fly away and go off from him in great numbers, while those that were in the same danger with him kept up close to him, though they were wounded both on their backs and on their sides, for they had each of them but this one hope of escaping. If they could assist Titus in opening himself a way that he might not be encompassed round by his enemies before he got away from them. Now there were two of those that were with him, but at some distance, the one of which the enemy compassed round and slew him with their darts, and his horse also. But the other they slew as he leapt down from his horse, and carried off his horse with them. But Titus escaped with the rest and came safe to the camp. So the success of the Jews' first attack raised their minds and gave them an ill-grounded hope, and the short inclination of fortune on their side made them very courageous for the future.
Question. Is God an elitist? He saved Titus, but some of Titus's men died. So he's like, no, fuck those other guys. You're on your own. I only protect princes, gods, maybe occasional princess, whatever. But so I guess all the rest of us are on our own. Is that what you're telling me, Josephus?
Yeah. Titus was protected by God. He was the son of the Messiah.
Had the aura.
Because remember,
right. Oh, that's right.
Josephus is convinced that Vespasian is the Messiah, the long-awaited Messiah of the Jews.
The son of the Messiah.
Who's the Roman that's going to save them from being oppressed by the Romans. Sure, that works. But this is like, from my perspective, this is just a reminder as to how authors in the first century Greco-Roman Empire seem to be willing to ascribe miracles to events that happened. We saw it all the time in Tacitus. Even though Tacitus was skeptical, he did say people said this, people said that. We've seen
Right.
it in Josephus, and we see the exact same thing in the writings of the New Testament. You know, it's this, they're just ready to ascribe any of these events to miracles and protection by gods. Josephus, is a Jew in the late first century, is more than happy to ascribe the protection of Titus to the God of the Jews.
I don't think there was many miracles just bebopping around back then as they think they were. Just because you don't understand or something seems miraculous doesn't mean it is. I mean, there are people that defy the odds. I mean, we should not be doing the podcast for this long. People should have kicked us out a long time. The point I want to make is, just throwing, is
We're
he
protected
telling the
by
Roman
God? That's what you're saying?
a little bit,
We are
a
the
little
chosen
bit.
ones? Yeah.
No, I mean, but Josephus knows the audience to which he is writing for. He knows what he's doing. He knows where his bread is buttered. But just don't throw out the word miracle all the time.
To wonder what would have happened if Titus had been captured or killed during this
Oh
recon
fuck!
mission, though, right?
God, you let me down. God, you know, it would have went from oh praise God to you son of a. So who knows? God can't win. God can't win.
Just to the whole First Jewish-Roman War. If Titus had been killed, what would
Done.
Vespasian have done next?
Yeah. Well,
Just
he
send
lost
another
his
guy,
brother.
probably.
Well, he lost a brother, and now he's going to lose a son. So does he get angry and send a massive army? Just wipe out Judea. Just fucking wipe that. I mean, I don't know. But he seemed like he had a pretty level head on his shoulders. But again, the loss of a son, that's pretty powerful. If that had happened.
So after this, Titus has all of his legions arrive outside of Jerusalem, and they set up camp in various places around the city. And at this point, the warring Jewish factions realize that they need to unite if they're going to defeat the Romans. The infighting needs to stop. Josephus says, now when hitherto the several parties in the city had been dashing one against another perpetually, this foreign war now suddenly come upon them after a violent manner put the first stop to their contentions one against another. Although this was part 2 of the war against the Romans, Vespasian had been down there on behalf of Nero originally. He left.
Right.
Maybe they didn't think they were coming back, but now they're back.
Yeah.
And as the seditious now saw with astonishment the Romans pitching 3 camps, they began to think of an awkward sort of concord and said to one another, what do we do here, and what do we mean when we suffer 3 fortified walls to be built to coop us in, that we shall not be able to breathe freely while the enemy is securely building a kind of city in opposition to us? And while we sit still within our own walls and become spectators only of what they are doing, with our hands idle and our armour laid by as if they were about somewhat that was for our good and advantage. So they decided to put their battle aside and unite to fight the Romans.
Aw, kumbaya moment. I don't know if that's appropriate, but yeah, no. And not only that, so they're working together for the first time, and they're waiting for the Romans to make a mistake.
The Mount of Olives is where the Jews buried their dead, and is also where Jesus supposedly ascended into heaven.
Okay, cool.
But there's another interesting story in Josephus about the Mount of Olives. He says that during the time of the Roman procurator Antonius Felix, which was 52 to 60 CE,
right,
a decade or so before the events that are taking place at the moment, a Jewish prophetic figure known as the Egyptian gathered his followers atop the Mount of Olives in preparation for an invasion of the city, or in the belief that he would cause the walls of Jerusalem to fall, allowing them to enter. This group was crushed by the Romans. While the Egyptian managed to flee, many of his followers were killed or taken captive, and the remainder escaped.
So the miracle is he survived. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. And, this is taking place before the New Testament was written. So, timeline for the kids listening at home, Jesus supposedly has his ministry between the years of 30 and 33 CE, according to most datings of it. But there's really no evidence to support that.
Oh,
They're
wow.
really just made up. dates. No one really knows. There's no historical evidence for Jesus at all, really, let alone the dates. So it's kind of just been pulled together out of string and sawdust. But if we take that as an accurate timeline, then the earliest Christian writings we have are from Paul, which are sort of dated to the early to mid 50s to the late to around about 60, I think. We do know Paul existed. We have his own written letters, and scholars are able to date those based on some of the historical things that occur in them. And then the New Testament gets written after the destruction of the temple, according to most scholars. So the first gospel, most scholars think it was the gospel according to Mark, was probably written around about the year 69 or 70 CE after the temple was destroyed. So these stories about guys like the Egyptian on the Mount of Olives would have been known to Jews across the Greco-Roman Empire. Gospel according to Mark, most scholars think probably wasn't written by a Jew in Jerusalem, was probably written by a Greek guy living somewhere, maybe in Rome, I think. But he would have been familiar with this story and how these stories sort of provided the tapestry for the gospel stories. Written much later is Acts of the Apostles, written by the same author, scholars think, as the person who wrote the gospel according to Luke, who supposedly is a companion of Paul. Scholars don't believe that he knew Paul at all. They don't believe that Luke was his name. But anyway, it's an anonymous gospel like the rest of them. But in the Acts of the Apostles, the commander of the Roman garrison in Jerusalem mistakes Paul for this Egyptian and says, "Aren't you the Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists out into the wilderness some time ago?"
No, I'm not. Sorry.
Which is a fascinating story. Like, why would this be in the Acts of the Apostles in the first place? Which is, a mostly fake document. The purpose of the Acts of the Apostles is to make it look like Paul and Peter got along. And Paul got along with the other founders of the Christian cult, the Jesus cult. Whereas we know from Paul's own writings that he didn't, and called bullshit on them. And we can assume from Paul's complaints that several leaders of the church in Jerusalem were sending people out to his churches telling them not to listen to him, that they didn't like him either. And Acts of the Apostles sort of whitewashes all of that. But interesting that it says, "Aren't you the Egyptian?" Now, why would the commander of a Roman garrison in Jerusalem mistake Paul for this Egyptian guy who had been the leader of a group of terrorists years earlier? It's a very, very strange story that we don't have a good explanation for, but just another example of a lot of the weird, confusing stories that are in the New Testament and how they fit like a jigsaw puzzle into the history of what was going on in Jerusalem in the first century CE.
Yeah. It's not like they had photos or wanted posters or maybe a good artist. I don't know. But yeah, to randomly pick out a guy and go, "Hey, aren't you him?" That's sus at the very least.
And why would the author of Acts of the Apostles even put that story in there unless
Good point. Yeah.
there's some suggestion that
An agenda?
Paul was connected to that, or they wanted to highlight that story? It's such a throwaway line.
Right.
A case of mistaken identity. Why would you put that in there?
Yeah.
Anyway.
More infighting.
So as you say, the Mount of Olives guy attack was nearly successful. Again, Titus manages to bring in a relief force. He nearly gets killed again when he gets separated, but again he survives.
God.
His men urge him to leave the battlefield and protect himself. He goes, "No, I am tough and protected by God."
Yeah.
So they're able to defeat the Jews again, and now the 10th Legion is fully armed up and drives the Jews back into the city. Josephus also says that the disorderly way the Jews attacked confused the Romans. They're used to fighting in their ranks and obeying orders, discipline. They're not quite sure how to handle a disorganized attack. Even when they've been fighting the Germans, as we know, were trained by the Romans. So generally speaking, they're not wild barbarians.
Right.
But Titus is a little bit off put. Like, how do you fight barbarians? How do you fight people that don't obey the rules of warfare as they were?
Rabble. Yeah.
And of course, we see this continue to modern times. Fighting terrorists in Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam before that. Modern armies still struggle to figure out how to deal with what you might call disorganized, but really it's sometimes a deliberate strategy. How do you take on a greater force where you just go crazy? You do Mel Gibson and Lethal Weapon. You just play the crazy card.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
they don't
You
know
just
how
go.
to handle it. Yeah.
You just go.
Yeah.
Well, I honestly thought you were going to say, remember when we did the Tacitus on the Jews, he did throw in some remarks about uncultured, uncouth, not whatever, putting down their culture. I thought you were going to say, oh, the Jews can't even fight properly. They can't fight like organized, cultured people or whatever. Maybe it was another slight that they're fighting like animals. And again, that might be taking it too far, but it's still another negative comment. If you look at it from a certain point of view, oh, they're wild, they're crazy. But that's where I thought you were going with that one. But who knows?
We don't have Tacitus anymore to provide that commentary. I'm sure Tacitus probably would have leaned into that.
Yeah.
Josephus, although as a Jew, also just describes them as disorganized and disorderly, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
You would think that from Josephus, a Jewish commander, you would have more insight into
More pride. Something.
Jewish, yeah, or at least some insight into Jewish. Like he could have written, well, the Romans thought they were crazy, but really what they were doing was X, Y, and Z. But no, he doesn't.
Exactly. He just
try and defend them.
Yeah. Well, he's selling his
What he
books to
does say-
Romans. He's selling to Romans, not to Jewish
That's
people.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. While he's being, he's living with the emperors.
Right.
He does say that after Titus stopped this attack, as the early success of the Jews was reported back in the city, more and more of them came to pile on the Romans. And eventually the Romans retreated from the city, ran back to their camp. Around the middle of the day, Titus sends a large number of his legion up to fortify their camp, but the Jewish watchtower misread that and thought they were retreating and signaled fresh troops in the city to go and attack. He says there came out a fresh multitude of Jews, and that with such mighty violence that one might compare it to the running of the most terrible wild beasts. To say the truth, none of those that opposed them could sustain the fury with which they made their attacks. But as if they had been cast out of an engine, they brake the enemy's ranks to pieces, who were put to flight and ran away to the mountain, none but Titus himself and a few others with him being left in the midst of the activity. Now,
Here we go.
Use of the word engine, Ray, cast out of an engine. Does that strike you as strange?
It strikes me as odd because engine is what, at this point, is it to push or pull something? I don't know. I'm reaching here, but I find the word used in that context strange, but I'm sure there's more to it than I know.
Well, I dug into it with ChatGPT and tried to figure out what he's referring to here. And it said, well, they had siege engines at the time. So an engine, whatever, Josephus was probably writing in Greek, whatever the term was that he actually used, would have referred to something being thrown out of a siege engine, or a catapult or something like that.
Power. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
They were being flung into their attacks.
And they were missiles.
He continues, now these others who were his friends despised the danger they were in and were ashamed to leave their general, earnestly exhorting him to give way to these Jews that are fond of dying, and not to run into such dangers before those that ought to stay before him, to consider what his fortune was, and not, when he was master of the war and of the world, to fill the place of a common soldier, to venture to turn back upon the enemy so suddenly, and this because he was general in the war and lord of the habitable earth,
Yeah.
on whose preservation the public affairs do all depend. But Titus chose to ignore them and charged against the Jews and killed large numbers of them.
Yea, did. God's help. God be praised.
So
Jeez.
he says that the Titus then decided, in order to make future battles with the Jews outside of the city gates easier, they had to flatten all of the hedges and all of the walls and cut down all of the fruit trees and fill up all of the hollow places, demolish rocky precipices, basically just leveled the entire area between their camps and the city walls to make it easier to fight.
Did he not know, because even I know this, did he not know that to level the playing field, that's an expression. That's not something you do literally, but he sent thousands of men out there, like you said, to tear things down, to fill in holes, to smooth it over. I mean, it's brilliant in that sense, but boy, it's an expression. But again, maybe this is where the expression came from for all I know. But again, he did what he needed to do. I'm sure it was a lot of hard work, but a fantastic tactic.
I think it was also because he wanted to build camps closer to the city walls to lay siege to the city.
Yeah.
But then the Jews came up with a cunning strategy, Ray. What was their next cunning strategy? Master, I have a cunning plan.
Hey, Mr. B, I have a cunning plan to solve the problem. Yes, Morning, let us not forget that you tried to solve the problem of your mother's low ceiling by cutting off her head.
It would have worked. I can't stress that enough if we'd cut off her head. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No,
so I'm not sure which brilliant plan that Baldric probably helped them with that you're referring to.
Oh, so this is something, again, I remember the Gauls trying this, Vercingetorix trying this.
Right.
100 years earlier in the days of Caesar's attack on Gauls. But hey, it's a good plan.
Yeah.
Didn't work then. Turns out doesn't work now, but it's worth a try.
It sounds
so.
good.
A group of the Jews left the city looking like they'd been evicted by the people in the city.
Oh, gotcha.
So the Jews inside the city made it look like they wanted peace. And so they rounded up the troublemakers who wanted to fight the Romans and pushed them out of the city for the Romans to get at.
Right.
Whilst the ones inside the city who wanted peace stood on the walls and cried out, "These are the troublemakers," and they were even throwing stones at their own people. "Come and grab them, take them, kill them. We don't like them. Then come in. Everything's good. Come into the city. Everything will be fine. There, just take care of the trouble." Now, Vercingetorix, as I recall, sent the women and the children and the elderly out of the city.
Yes.
Assuming that Caesar would feed them and protect them out of humanitarian reasons. And Caesar was like, "Not my problem, bitch.
Nope.
They can just sit in the middle and starve of the circumvallation." So it didn't work. So this is slightly different.
Right. But still.
And unfortunately, some of Titus's men fell for the trick. Titus, according to Josephus, was suspicious because only a day earlier he had invited the Jews to parley and to, strike some peace terms, and they told him to go fuck himself.
Right.
So now to, be making some sort of a peace offering.
It's a little hollow.
He was like,
yeah,
something doesn't smell right about this. Exactly. But some of his troops didn't get the memo and eagerly ran up to the gates of Jerusalem, thinking that they would be let in.
Yeah.
By the guys on the inside. They'd be the first to get in, get the bounty, get the loot, be the victors.
They got something else.
Yeah. As soon as they got up close to the gates, the Jews that had been supposedly evicted from the city trapped them in a pincer movement, and the people who were standing on the walls killed them by throwing stones and darts and firing arrows, etc. Killed lots of them, wounded many, more who couldn't escape. Then the
Damn.
Jews made fun of the Romans for being stupid
I don't blame them.
and made, according to Josephus, made noises while beating their shields.
Oh,
I think pants were probably dropped.
right,
Eyes that were brown were probably exhibited.
right. I mock you, sir, as I'm beating the crap out of you. Yeah. Injury.
Now, the ones who survived the attack made it back to camp, and Titus, not
Yeah.
happy.
No. Did you not get the memo?
Josephus Titus said that Jews who are only conducted by their madness do everything with care and circumspection. They contrive stratagems and lay ambushes. And fortune gives success to their stratagems because they are obedient and preserve their goodwill and fidelity to one another.
Let's make signals.
Obviously, he hadn't heard about the civil
Yeah.
war that was going on inside of the city.
Yeah, they're killing
While
each
the
other.
Romans, to whom fortune uses to be ever subservient, by result of their goodwill, do nothing. Reason of their good order and ready submission to their commanders have now had ill success by their contrary behavior, and by not being able to restrain their hands from action, they have been caught. And that which is the most to their reproach, they've gone on without their commanders in the very presence of Caesar.
Damn.
Truly the laws of war cannot but groan heavily, as will my father also himself, when he shall be informed of this wound that hath been given us, since he who is grown old in wars did never make so great a mistake. Our laws of war do also ever inflict capital punishment on those that in the least break into good order, while at this time they have seen an entire army run into disorder. However, those that have been so insolent shall be made immediately sensible that even they who conquer among the Romans without orders for fighting are to be under disgrace. So apparently Titus wanted to execute all of the survivors.
Yeah. I punish you so my dad doesn't punish me. Do you remember a couple of episodes ago when we first started talking about this? The then prefect of Egypt, a Tiberius Alexander, Vespasian removed him from that position, put someone else in there because he wanted him to go with Titus to be his second, his deputy, to be his advisor. This guy needs to speak up more. I don't know, but yeah. So Vespasian's like, I love my son. He could have more experience, but I'm sending you with him. Your job is to make him not get killed. Don't lose my army, and if at all possible, try not to embarrass me. And so far, the third one is it's kind of happening. So yeah, so the Jews were able to trick some of the Romans, kill them, and that's what you do. You if you can't take them all out at once, you slice and dice as best you can. So Titus needs to up his game real quick.
Apparently, some of the soldiers begged him not to execute them. I think the argument would have been, we don't have the numbers as
Yeah.
it is. We can't
Yeah.
go
I've learned my lesson.
reducing our numbers. Yeah. So he decided to let them off with a talking to. And then they continued to flatten the area between the camp and the walls, which Josephus said only took 4 days. And then they set up their camp closer to the city.
Damn.
But during this period of respite for the Jews, there was a Passover celebration going on. What happened during the Passover celebration in Jerusalem, Ray?
Well, remember, stuff like this is about love and forgiveness and brotherhood, and don't ever forget that. So the Passover's feast of the unleavened bread is coming. To commemorate this, like I said earlier, to commemorate the Israelites being delivered from slavery to Egypt. So I've heard several different pronunciations. So Eleazar and the Zealots. How do you pronounce his name? I looked it up on a video and I got a couple of different pronunciations. I'm just going to say Eleazar. Does that sound right? Who's in charge of the Zealots?
Good enough.
Does that sound
Good enough for me.
So anyway, so he and the Zealots, they have to open the temple gates because what they got to do is let everybody in so they can do their religious observance, because that's what you do. If he had not opened the gates, there would have been a lot of bad juju, because this is a very important thing to them. But John of, Gishkala, had thousands of his own men go into the city to observe this. However, under their robes and tunics or whatever the hell they were wearing, and this is one of the three who's vying for power of Jerusalem. They go in armed. And so there's thousands of them. They're going in for the Passover, and John gives the order, and they start killing zealots. So again, they use I think it was obviously a religious practice, but obviously it's supposed to be something taken very seriously. And it's not about war. It's about escaping slavery. And they use it to kill fellow Jews. I don't know how the God of the Jews is going to view that. But John has finally made his move, and he's going after the zealots because he was able to use this to get thousands of his men into the city armed, and now it's stabby time.
Yeah. Eleazar ben Simon was the zealot leader during this period. There's a couple of Eleazars, so
Yes.
there's also a guy called Eleazar ben Yair, who was the Sicarii leader at Masada. Different Eleazars. One's a zealot, one's a Sicarii. The zealots and the Sicarii, it's sort of fascinating. We've talked about these on shows over the years, like these assassins that came up during this period. The zealots, I know we've talked about the zealots before, I don't know when or how much, but the zealots were a Jewish political movement during this period. Zealotry is the term used by Josephus, and we still use that term today. Somebody's a zealot, meaning they have a lot of zeal.
Mm-hmm.
The Jewish concept of zeal was total commitment to God's will and law. And as far as we know, Eleazar ben Simon's faction is the only group to have really explicitly used the title of zealots.
Right.
They were radicals. They really had established themselves as a fourth sect. Not by him, though. A guy called Judas of Galilee was the creator of the zealots around about 6 CE against the census of Quirinius. Now, of course, in the New Testament, the guy that supposedly betrays Jesus
Mm-hmm.
is named Judas.
Right.
Common name in Israel at the time, in Judea at the time. But, you have to wonder the conflagration of these different characters in the writing of the New Testament stories. Assuming, I've said this before, I say this in the documentary too, but Gospel of Mark is the first gospel that we think was written. And the first time Jesus appears in the gospel according to Mark, which from memory is 4:12, he's on the shore. There's people begging him for miracles. He gets on a boat with his disciples, goes out into the water.
Yeah.
And to paraphrase, he says to them, listen, everything I tell the great unwashed masses, I'm going to tell in parables, because if they knew the truth, they'd want to get saved.
Right.
And I'm not here for that.
No.
I'm only going to tell you the real story.
Right.
And they say, what is it, Jesus? And he goes, I'm tapping my nose for people not watching the video.
What nudge?
And he never tells them what the
Right.
real secret is. And when I did my
Suckers.
documentary, I asked all the biblical scholars, so what is the secret? And they go, we don't know.
Yeah.
It's called the Markan secret. No one knows what it is.
Mm.
But it seems to be a way, like if you read that now and you go, well, why is the author of Mark putting that in the book?
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to tell you the real story. We're going to just give you parables. Everything's going to be a riddle wrapped in a secret.
But we still want you to follow us. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
You have to wonder, okay, so are these stories meant to be taken literally as historical stories, or are they a conflagration of stories that have been mashed together to try and provide some sort of mythical archetype? Then you have these guys like the zealots that were active during the period when Jesus supposedly lived, created by Judas of Galilee. You go, okay, so what's the connection really in the author's mind between this guy and if there is one, maybe there's not, we don't know.
Yeah.
But the main three Jewish sects of the time were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, and then you've got the Zealots as well. According to the Jewish Encyclopedia article on Zealots, Judah of Gaulanitis, which is also Galilee, is regarded as the founder of the Zealots, who are identified as the proponents of the fourth philosophy. In the original sources, however, no such identification is anywhere clearly made, and the question is hardly raised of the relationship between the Sicarii, the upholders of the fourth philosophy, and the Zealots. Josephus himself, in his general survey of the various groups of freedom fighters, enumerates the Sicarii first, whereas he mentions the Zealots last. So, no one really knows a great deal about who these people were and what they stood for, but they seem to be related somehow to the Sicarii, who were running around killing Jews that they considered apostates and collaborators.
Wow.
So it's a very mixed up sort of mishmash of ideas. We don't really know much about the ideology of the Zealots, except they seem to think that the Jews in positions of authority in Judea were traitors to Jews. They were too much in bed with the Romans. So, yeah. And the Sicarii was sort of a splinter group that were running around doing assassinations with Sikai daggers, small daggers concealed under their cloaks. That's where the name comes from. They would pull these daggers out, a little bit like Julius Caesar's best friends, and just attack Romans or Roman sympathizers and then blend into the crowd afterwards.
Work. Can I just say, as an outsider, because whatever, but God might be perfect, Jesus might be perfect without blemish, but his earlier followers leave a lot to be desired. There's a lot of hodgepodge. There's a lot of crossing the streams. There's a lot of it that's messed up, and I would think that God's like, if I could do it all over again, maybe you assholes could get your message straight. But they're just, and these are the things, and I'm kind of joking, but these are the things that people pick up on when they do study Christianity. They're like, there's a lot of contradictions. A lot of this doesn't make sense. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of holes. There's a lot of things that are counterintuitive. It's not exactly a good foundation to try to convert somebody over to your religion, So again, I know that you made an entire film on that, but again, it's like, so don't get mad at me if I'm not following the path that you want me to, because a lot of it just doesn't make sense to me, anyways.
Yeah.
I didn't mean
But
that
it's
to be
interesting
as
to
cruel.
read.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
But so the reason I explain all of this about zealots, and I mentioned before that they thought that Paul might have been the Egyptian, whoever
Right.
that was, who was
Right.
trying to attack Jerusalem. There are several points in the New Testament where Paul is described as being zealous. In Acts
Ooh.
22:3,
Right.
there's a verse that says he was zealous for God.
That's
It's
bad.
putting words in his own mouth. I am a Jew who
Right.
is zealous for God. So it's a suggestion that he might have been a zealot. Some New Testament scholars think that
Right.
as well as some other references in Galatians and Philippians, suggest that Paul might have been a zealot before he became a follower of the Jesus cult.
Okay. That's almost like slander, passive aggressive. You're taking a dig at him by hinting that he might have been a zealot. Anyway, sorry.
Well, Galatians is written by Paul. It's
Mhm.
one of his own letters.
Right. Okay.
Where he says that he was zealous.
Okay.
Trying to find an actual quote here. For you have heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers.
Someone trying to use that against him. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, he wrote that. That's his own letters, so considered to be authentic by scholars. So he may have been a zealot. Scholars don't agree on that across the board, but he was persecuting other Jews by his own admission, and he was very zealous by his own admission. So he may have been part of the zealots.
Gotcha.
Which again puts the whole Jesus thing into more perspective, as he was one of the major leaders of the Jesus cult.
Mm-hmm.
In the early years. Maybe he was a zealot that saw a new opportunity for being zealous by picking up this Jesus thing and running with it.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so they basically, John goes into the temple, fights the zealots. Eleazar, as I understand it, and his deputy Simon ben Arenas decide to throw their lot in with John of Giscala.
Yeah.
And they and the roughly 2,400 zealots come over to his side and vowed to follow him for the rest of the war. So now, in one fell swoop, there are no longer three factions in Jerusalem. There are just two, John and Simon. John now controlling all of Jerusalem apart from the upper city, and Simon controlling the lower part of the city. They reconciled, decided to unite against the Romans again. But their factions continue to maintain separate leadership structures.
Yeah.
John's in charge of defending the Temple Mount and the Kidron Valley, while Simon's defending the city's residential areas. And it was around about this time, as I mentioned earlier, that Titus had offered peace terms, which had been rejected. But also he's decided they're kind of crazy and hard to battle. Right. So he's starting to think, is this really a lay siege situation, or do we just circumvallate the city and starve them out? So we'll see which approach he takes in the next episode.